This 20-minute video will show you how my husband restored our 33-year-old KEF 104/2 reference speakers. He purchased these speakers new in 1984. The video will cover the following: replacing the foam donut surrounds on the woofers, replacing TS1191 tweeters with Morel MDT29 4-ohm soft dome liquid cooled tweeters, and finally replacing all the capacitors with all cap 100 volt low loss electrolytic capacitors. So let's get started. We are going to begin with the lower woofer. Start by removing the speaker grill. Open the bottom access panel by removing the 8 screws. The bottom panels on our speakers were siliconed into place and had to be pried off, so they were unfortunately destroyed while being removed. My husband will have to make new ones out of plywood. Remove the insulation in the lower cavity. Remove the 3 nuts and washers around the 8-inch woofer. You may need to put a Phillips screwdriver through the base reflex hole and hold the screw in place if it turns. Now remove the 10mm bolt that connects to the force-canceling alloy bar that joins the 2 woofers. This will allow the bottom woofer to come free. Notice the considerable amount of foam rot after 33 years. Disconnect the wire leads to the bottom woofer. Note where negative and positive are attached. Carefully remove the foam rot, making sure none of it gets into the space between the cone and the center post. Apply some isopropyl alcohol where the donut was attached to the woofer. The alcohol will make it easier to remove the remaining bits of foam. Allow the alcohol to soak into the affected area for a few minutes. Using a flat-edged X-Acto knife or similar instrument, scrape away the foam from the center post. Once again, be careful not to let any bits fall down in the space between the center post and the cone. Now scrape away the foam bits and glue around the cone. It is unlikely that all the glue will be removed, and that's okay. You can use your other hand to support the cone below as you scrape. Be careful not to scrape too hard so as not to damage the cone. This is about as good as you need to do removing the remaining bits of foam. My husband also took the opportunity to replace all the grommets on each of the woofers. Most of them were in pretty bad shape. Take the special adhesive that comes included with the kit from Simply Speakers and apply a bead around the center post and around the cone where the new donut surround will be attached. Be careful not to get any of the adhesive in between the cone and the center post. You may notice that my husband scraped away all the old adhesive on this woofer. However, we don't recommend this since it's likely to damage the cone. Once all the glue is applied around the center post and the cone, carefully place the donut surround into place. Try to center the donut as much as possible. Use a small dull instrument to lightly press the edge of the donut onto the center post and the cone. Let dry overnight. Next, we apply liquid foam guard brush-on sealer. This was purchased from Simply Speakers as an add-on option to the kit. The sealer protects the foam surround from moisture and mechanical breakdown. The sealer goes on white, dries clear, and leaves a slight gloss finish. Now we'll continue with the upper woofer. First, remove the 4 bolts that hold the mid-range and tweeter enclosure in place. Lift the enclosure and place it on its end. You will see 6 wires that connect the mid-range and tweeter to the speaker box. Disconnect the 6 wires. Although there's a diagram, my husband preferred to use matching numbers to identify where the wires will reconnect when reattaching the enclosure. Remove the upper access panel and insulation to access the upper 8-inch woofer. There are 3 nuts and washers that need to be removed, like the lower woofer. At this end of the speaker, it's a little more challenging getting your arm and hand into the bass reflex port to steady the screw head if the screw turns. Next, remove the 10mm bolt that attaches the upper woofer to the force-canceling alloy bar. Pull the upper woofer away from its mount and detach the 2 leads from the crossover board. Mark the wires if necessary. As you can see, this woofer's donut is in need of replacement, just like the lower one. The next thing to replace is the tweeter. My husband replaced the original KEF T33 tweeters in 1991 with TS 1191 tweeters. We will be replacing these with Morel MDT 29 4-ohm tweeters. If you are replacing the original KEF tweeters, you will need to do the same simple modifications that my husband did to accommodate the new tweeter. Let's begin by placing the enclosure on its front face to gain access to the old tweeter. First, back off the screw that secures the tweeter in place. This allows the wood block to slide out of the way so you can remove the old tweeter. Since this large faceplate on the new tweeter won't fit, it will have to be removed and discarded. Removing the faceplate and the 3 screws allows the upper section of the new tweeter to separate. The screws can be reinstalled to keep the upper section secure, but first they will have to be shortened. A Dremel tool can be used to cut off about 3 mm from each of the screws. You may need to file the end to remove any burr. Reinstall the screws to secure the upper section into place. Next, remove the 2 leads from the old tweeter, making sure to remember which lead is positive and which is negative. Solder both leads onto the new morale tweeter. Since the screw heads protrude, it is helpful to add a piece of 5 mm weather stripping around the existing seal to make sure the tweeter seats up properly against the enclosure. The Morel tweeter is about 3 mm thicker than the TS 1191 tweeter, so the wood block does not slide over the new tweeter. My husband has come up with a very simple solution to solve this problem. A small modification to the wood block will allow the blind nut underneath to be recessed and the tweeter to fit properly into the enclosure. Remove the screw and slide the wood block to the center. Turn the enclosure on its back and insert the screw from the front of the enclosure into the blind nut a few turns. Using a pair of pliers, pull on the screw to remove the blind nut. Here you can clearly see the hole in the sliding wood block. Now, using a drill with a 1/2 inch bit, drill into the hole about 1/8 of an inch or 3 mm. Center the sliding wood block so that you can see the hole through the tweeter port and rest it on a piece of wood. Put the screw into the blind nut with the nut flange facing up and install the nut back into the hole. A few taps with a hammer will set the blind nut into the hole so that the flange is flush with the surface of the sliding wood block. Remove the screw. And now you can see that the blind nut is flush with the surface. The next step is to install the new tweeter. You can stick a piece of gun tape on the back of the tweeter to give the screw something to grab onto. As you can see, the sliding wood block effortlessly slides over the top of the new tweeter. Reinstall the screw. Now it's a simple matter of centering the tweeter in its hole and torquing down the screw to firmly hold the tweeter in place. There you have it. The new Morel tweeter is installed. Now for the capacitors. The first thing we're going to do is remove the crossover board. Remove the 6 wing nuts and lock nuts and disconnect the wiring harness. Note how the harness is installed on the board before removing it. The crossover board slides easily out through the bottom access hole. We're going to replace all the blue capacitors. It's a good idea to remove and replace the capacitors one by one. That way you can make sure each old capacitor is replaced with the correct new one. You can purchase these replacement capacitors from Falcon Acoustics in the UK. My husband had to contact them to ask a few questions about the caps, and they were very helpful. Most of the old capacitors are rated at 50 volts. The new replacements are rated at 100 volts. All these new capacitors meet the specifications by KEF. I assisted my husband by doing all the soldering on the second board. It was a great learning experience. Here is the crossover board with all the new caps installed. Since the 240 microfarad caps are no longer manufactured, they have been replaced with two 120 microfarad caps in parallel. These can be joined with a glue gun. All the inductors were reattached with new tie straps. The board is ready to be installed. It goes back the same way it came out, through the bottom. Notice the 6 posts which the board has to be seated on. Once the board is properly seated, install the 6 lock washers and wing nuts. Reattach the wiring harness. This harness was offset upwards by 1 pin. In other words, it is connected to all the pins except the bottom pin. Here's the upper woofer installed, the 3 washers and nuts, and the 10 mm center bolt that attaches to the top of the force cancelling alloy bar have been reinstalled. Notice how the sealer dried to a clear coat on the donut surround. After soldering the leads to the correct posts, the bottom woofer is back into its position. The 10 mm bolt goes through the center of the woofer and attaches to the bottom end of the force cancelling alloy bar. Reinstall the 3 nuts and washers on the lower woofer and tighten. Then put the insulation back in. The insulation goes back into the upper cavity and the upper access panel is screwed into place. Place the mid-range tweeter enclosure on its end on top of the main speaker and reattach the 6 wires to the small circuit board. Ensure the wires are connected to the correct posts. Attach the upper enclosure to the main speaker. We're almost finished. As mentioned earlier, the bottom panels were siliconed into place. My husband built 2 new panels out of 11-ply 5/8" birch plywood to replace the particle board panels he damaged while trying to remove them. Instead of using silicone, he added a strip of 5 mm wide weather stripping around the inside perimeter of the speaker box. And that about does it. This project took about 30 hours to complete and the cost was approximately $400 US. Hopefully this video was helpful to you. If you did find it helpful, please leave us a like. The restoration is complete and the speakers sound absolutely fantastic. Here is a clip of Mannheim Steamroller on our newly restored KEF speakers. Enjoy.